Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many folks from around the globe. Welcome. Thanks for being here. My name's Lena Waters, and I'm Grammarly's CMO and your host today. I'm really excited to share some new data and insights just for marketing leaders, and I hope to help all of our attendees make sense of this unique and pivotal moment for marketing. We will begin in just a few minutes. Before we do, a bit of housekeeping. Because of the size of the webinar, all attendees are automatically muted. To enable closed captioning, click the CC button at the bottom of your webinar window, as pictured here. We'll be using Slido for audience participation throughout the webinar. And to join, you can either scan the QR code on your screen or click the link in the chat. So get ready. We want to hear from you throughout the session. Please leave comments in the Q&A widget. We have the team working behind the scenes, and they will help answer all your questions. And lastly, don't worry about taking notes. We'll follow up with a recording of the event so that you don't miss a thing. So I am thrilled to introduce our guest for this webinar, Libby Rodney. Libby joins us from the Harris Poll, our partner for the past 3 years on our annual State of Business Communication report. Libby, would you introduce yourself?
Lena, it's so great to see you. I'm so happy to be here. Sure, I'm Libby Rodney. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Harris Poll, and I run the Futures and Thought Leadership practice.
That's great. It's great to have you here today. So here's a quick preview of how we're going to spend our time together. First, we're going to review the priorities of marketing and business leaders, and more interestingly, how these priorities are impacted by new challenges. And then we're going to dive into the marketing specific data in our 2024 State of Business Communication report and uncover some hidden inefficiencies and key areas where we all need to communicate better and not more. And then finally, we're going to dive into the massive potential that is Gen AI, but we'll do so in a way that helps marketing leaders narrow their focus on practical action items. So before we dive in, let's take a quick temperature check of the room. I assume that we all identify as marketers, or at least have an affinity for marketing, which is why you're all here today. So I'm going to treat this as a safe space. We're going to get into all the data and the best practices that you'll expect from your typical B2B webinar, but I also want to really knock down the fourth wall and get us some real talk with you all. The data that you're going to see today presents a state of overload for marketing leaders and their teams. And it also highlights this ever-growing remit that requires new leadership skills and team capabilities. I'm also going to assume that most of us on this webinar have a bias towards action, which means that, like me, you feel that there are not enough hours in the day to get it all done, or at least done well. So please take a second to answer the poll on your screen. What's your confidence level in identifying and meeting your marketing priorities for this year? More confident than I've ever been, confident. I have significant concerns, confident, but we'll need to hustle. We've got a clear winner here and some concerns. So let's start at the top, and you can see how your reactions fit into the data that we've seen. At a glance, the leadership priorities haven't really changed much. We want to make more money, we want to keep top talent, and do it all as efficiently as possible. But what is changing is the calculus of how we will get it all done. Priority management is an equation, and it basically divides your goals by your challenges. And our priorities haven't really changed much, but they have grown in scope and in complexity and ambiguity. So if you look at marketing's current priority equation, starting from the top, we've got 57% feel that operational efficiency is the priority, 55% increasing revenue and profitability, 54% employee satisfaction and retention, all big priorities. And they're underlain by these challenges of communication overload, technology overload, the new hybrid teams that we're all working with, and then this whole black box of AI and the potential that it presents. So Libby, you talk a lot with marketing teams and businesses in general about their priorities. How does this picture sit within the macro environment that you've been discussing?
Yeah, Lena, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we see with business leaders that we're talking about is that we all navigate right now through the era of polycrisis. And if you didn't know what that term means, that's an academic term for the fact that crises now are stacked and they're compounding. So when you think about economic uncertainty plus geopolitical risk plus supply chain issues plus AI disruption, you name it, it's all happening at the same time, which means that there's all these conflicting things that require our time and our attention, and really fundamentally our communication skills to be drawing some sort of clarity around. So the fact that all this data that you're showing here, there's just a big macro force on top of that as well, just creating so many challenges for today's marketer. Which gets us into what we found in the research, which marketing has a communication problem. So if you think about all the challenges that Lena talked about and the macro challenges of the poly crisis, marketing plays a key role in that, right? Center stage of driving clarity and context across the entire organization, but across all these new elements of change, whether it's tools or channels or kind of macro environment. But what you can see from this data is that marketers are just fundamentally spending more time communicating. So 42 hours a week spent on communication tasks, 13 hours a week spent in meetings, 10 hours a week in text-based chat. This is way more than workplace norms, 20 to 40% more than what other professionals are spending in their workplace, which means that we're kind of at this dangerous place as marketers in this communication spiral. And I'm curious, Lena, as a CMO, do these numbers surprise you? What goes on in your mind when you see this data?
Well, I have to say, none of this is surprising, but it does tell me that we've got work to do. Um,
Yeah.
Communication is our product, and so we're going to do it more than any other teams. But this dangerous communication spiral that you mentioned, it's very real. And the big question for me is what happens to creative and innovation when so much of our time is spent on this kind of communication? There's less time for brand and for professional differentiation. And 2 and 3 in particular here are red flags. They make me question if our operations are functioning as effectively as they need to be. So
Mm.
I think my big takeaway is that communication is a strategic imperative. And I really believe that it warrants the type of scrutiny that we apply to our other priorities. There is no other activity that we would allow our teams to spend 42 hours a week doing and not heavily measure, monitor, and optimize the most value out of it. So in pretty short order, we need to run diagnostics on our communication efforts, the same way that we do for things like CAC and LTV or return on ad spend. So we've got an incredible brain trust in the audience today. So, let's ask, I'm curious, why do you all think that marketing teams are in the state of communication overload? What is the biggest contributor to the state that we find ourselves in? Um, much varying levels of communication skills across the team, lack of clarity between activity and outcome. That's always a big one. Too many tools. Can we just chalk it all up to the fact that work has changed and we work more remote hybrid? Is that the big thing?
Mm.
Interesting.
It's probably a little bit of all of the above, right? If we if we really can get down to it. I mean, one of the big things that we've seen is that there is this marketing toolbox that is just overloaded. So if you think about Scott Brinkner's landscape, there's over 11,000 MarTech tools now. And we all know that marketers love new tools, right? I mean, they're usually the first amongst the organization to adapt to these new tools. And that's a wonderful thing, but it's challenging when it creates overload. And what we see in the research is that 84% of business leaders and 70% of knowledge workers say they have communicated across more channels at work in the past 12 months. And the key reason that this is important is because it creates context switching. And when you have context switching, that you lose momentum. It just zaps away corporate momentum around getting things done quickly and effectively. For example, a Harvard Business Review found that professionals lost 4 hours after switching apps on average a week, which adds up to 5 weeks a year. And I don't know about you, Lena, but I would love those 5 weeks back. And I can't believe we're losing so much time just switching between these tools. So curious what you think about that. What does it tell you?
Well, I'm a self-diagnosed tech junkie, I can tell you, Libby. So we definitely use a lot of tools across marketing. But I think what often goes unnoticed is that a lot of these tools that we use are designed for communication, or they at the very least have communication capabilities. So it creates these really fragmented conversations across what is this ever-growing communication stack. And each app represents this greedy little text box that is begging marketers for information incessantly throughout the day. So all day long, our teams are required to fill out these text boxes quickly and frequently. But when you think about it, each of these messages has a long tail impact that then gets codified into the system and then amplified across the internal stakeholders and the external audiences. And if we're not monitoring those appropriately, this communication technology that we're using can really quickly proliferate or inaccurate, confusing information. So, I'm not advocating for smaller tech stacks, but for more integrated stacks that enable the communication context and assistance that everywhere marketers are writing and communicating and producing content. And thinking a little more deeply about that, marketing's primary product is written content. It's the primary mode of communication in a modern digital workplace. And marketers are spending 26 hours, more than half of their work week, on written tasks. That's 38% more than the average worker. So, when you look at this data, marketing's relationship with writing is multidimensional. It's more than just putting words on the page. So our teams are spending 10 hours a week revising their own materials and editing other materials. And that's a necessity since marketing is the company's gatekeeper for effective communication. There's a big efficiency opportunity here if we can up-level the quality and the clarity of the first draft communication. This is an opportunity for marketing to be the strategic driver to up-level effective written communication across the entire organization. And this is even more prevalent in our shift to remote and async work. So, today, like every day, we're all tiny heads in a Zoom call, but we're all creating 5,000 words a day that represent us. Those words, they have to be effective, or else they're just contributing to the noise that we all feel. So, Libby, when we were looking at this research, it also uncovered the impact that all this communication has on our teams. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And to your point, Lena, about effective communication, it does have a huge impact. I think we can all understand that, yet we don't think about it as a true strategic driver. And the data shows that. So if you look at the green here versus the green is effective communication. It accelerates productivity, satisfaction, confidence, and decreases stress. But when we have poor communication, it increases stress, decreases productivity, decreases work satisfaction. And it seems so simple in some ways, right? But it's every email, every text, every Word doc that we're sending out to our teams or that our teams are sending out to other teams, it is either inherently accelerating productivity or it's halting it. And so it's one of those things that we really need to be thinking more strategically about, to your point, as this tool or as this key to kind of unlocking more value. But also, what else strategically should we talk about next?
Well, Libby, this would not be a marketing webinar in 2024 if we didn't talk about Gen AI. So generative AI has potential to transform everything that we've been talking about so far. It can simplify communication. It can automate some of those mundane tasks that we talked about. It can enhance the quality of all of this written communication that we're doing and, about 1,000 other things. But, how and if we capture its value is going to depend on how effectively we understand this technology and apply it practically across our work. This research captured some really compelling findings on Gen AI's potential. Can you help put that in a little bit of perspective?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's interesting. So every year we do the state of business communication with Grammarly. There's always like a million interesting data points, but there's always kind of a central theme. And this year it was the massive time and cost savings potential of AI. And I love what Scott Galloway says. He says it's the Ozempic for business leaders, meaning that they're looking for their time and attention and they're going to AI. But what we found is that it really has the potential to save up to 1.6 trillion annually in productivity. And the way that we get to that number is that workers who use Gen AI report saving almost an entire day a week in productivity. That equates to about $16,500. If you multiply that across 1,000-person organization, that's 16.5 million a year. But if you take that and you consider the US knowledge worker base, which is 100 million knowledge workers, that's a $1.6 trillion potential. And I think the challenge here is like a lot of people are now in an experiential or having experiences and experimentation with AI. But it's how do you get into the actual productivity level to achieve those AI benefits? Like we know marketers are so good at bringing new things to the organization. So we think that marketers can really be a catalyst for AI adoption across businesses. And we're curious to hear everyone on the phone's kind of point of view on that. So I think we're going to launch into another poll about, just in one word, and ideally this is a safe space. So it doesn't have to just be, I'm excited about AI or I hate it, but describe your relationship with AI. Like what are all the things that kind of come to mind? Tentative. That's a great one.
Great one.
Curious, intrigued, love, useful, overwhelming, interested, helpful, wary, ambivalent, helpful, learning, cautious. So that is all of the things, all of the research that we do on AI actually really hits all of these emotions people are feeling. It's usually a dualities of emotions that people feel, whether it's incomplete, unreliable, or it's easy and excited. There's just a mix of emotions because it's so big and it's so powerful of what the transformation that AI could bring. Great. And that actually gets kind of to our next point. AI as a technology has the potential to impact every element of business, but especially marketing, the process, people, the tools. And when we look at this data, what we find is that, there's big strides that are happening for marketers that use Gen AI. For example, 78% feel like it helps them get more done. Nearly 70% say it helps them communicate more efficiently. But also this 64% in the middle here, it improves their quality of work. And they're just, able to get more done. But we need to point out that in the story of Gen AI, just like your emotions, there's not one way or the other. It has two potential elements for business. So if AI is adopted thoughtfully and effectively, Gen AI can uplevel really every aspect of communication. It's very blue sky in that way. However, if it's implemented hastily, it could be, or even neglected, AI could be a risk. And I'm curious, Lena, how do you interpret Gen AI's potential from your point of view?
Well, I'm going to give us an analogy. Everyone remembers navigating in the old days. You had paper maps in books, Thomas guides, a folded map in your glove compartment. When MapQuest came out, that was mind blowing. You could do it, and then of course our cars were littered with printouts of MapQuest pages. If Gen AI is Waze, I think we're at the MapQuest stage.
Mhm.
We really thought that the future was here when we were in the middle, and we really had no concept of what that next phase would look like, which we all know as Waze. We've got this always on, contextually aware, navigation partner in our pocket now. And so I really think that we were making some early progress with Gen AI, but I don't think we have a really clear vision of the future. And Libby, as we think about this potential, the potential is great, as you mentioned, but
Yeah.
so are its risks. You need to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think so. When you talk to business leaders right now about AI and the risk, you quickly get to things like cybersecurity, misinformation, responsible AI. There's a whole plethora. But what I love about this research is that we were able to get a pulse from business leaders on what are they most concerned about. And you see security and privacy being one and two, so that makes a lot of sense because there's so much short-term risk associated with that. But then the other thing worth calling out is quality control at 63% and regulatory compliance at 54%. And we imagine those things are going to grow because there's more, I would call it like market case studies about AI chatbots going rogue. And I don't know if you heard about it. I'm not going to name names, but there was a major airline recently that was in the press because its AI powered chatbot updated the airline bereavement policy for a consumer that was against their corporate policy because it was trying to be emotional and generative to the person's needs. That company did not honor it, and it ultimately went to court. And the judge said that, of course, you have to honor it. This is the company's responsibility. The company tried to say, this is not our responsibility. This is a third party AI chatbot. And the judge was like, absolutely not. Anything that is coming through you is your responsibility. So at the end of the day, AI risk is really your risk. And that doesn't mean it's risky or not risky. The world, we have to figure this out. There's some in between there. But I'm curious, Lena, from your point of view of how do marketers start unlocking the benefits of AI, navigating through these risks and these challenges? And what should people be thinking about?
Well, it's exactly the duality, right? That we saw in the word cloud. We're all excited by this unprecedented future of AI, but we're struggling with the immediate
Mhm.
application of it. Greg Verdino, one of the leading voices on digital transformation, he captured it well. He referred to Gen AI's disruptive potential and said, "This has left many marketers torn between the fear of missing out and the fear of messing up." So we've got a new acronym now. Many are afraid of becoming obsolete. This FOBO. This is where leaders need to step in and inspire creative and innovative confidence in our marketing teams. I always tell my team, look, if we're not messing up on a pretty regular basis, it means to me that we're not taking big enough swings. But it also helps to have a set of guardrails for the failure that I and the business are willing to learn from. So, for instance, data security and customer privacy non-negotiable. We're overly cautious there. But I'm very interested on the other side in seeing how Gen AI is going to unlock new creativity, content, new personalized experiences at scale. I have a huge appetite for risk there, and I let my team know that. And Libby, you've been talking to a lot of companies on their approach to Gen AI. So, what are some of the better strategies that you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big strategy would be to think big and act incrementally. And the thing is, like, AI is probably going to change the way we do a lot of things, like how we market, how we work, how we live, but it's not going to happen overnight, and not in one fell swoop. And so one way to think about it is AI is a massive ocean, right? And there's so many possibilities, but you don't have to tackle the ocean all at once. You just have to get your feet on the shore. You need to start walking. You need to start making some incremental change towards that. You learned how to swim, et cetera, et cetera. So really, it's getting out of the state of analysis paralysis and just starting to take those first steps. and thinking about the long-term vision and then what do you need to get there. But I'm curious, Lena, how you see this incrementality playing out in marketing.
Yeah, Libby, I totally agree with the ocean analogy. I think we have to keep it simple. You know, first principles. You start with the problem, and then we see how can AI help, excuse me, help us solve that. We can learn a lot from marketers who are already actively using Gen AI, and they're starting with what they know. So, you know, on the screen here, you see a number of these writing and communication challenges that we discussed earlier. And the percentages represent the number of marketers who are already using Gen AI to solve these challenges. Many marketers struggle with the blank page. You know, I do. Is that the first draft of the marketing materials, or even just an internal communication? And here we see almost 80% of marketers are using generative AI to accelerate and enhance their ideation and their content creation. And if you remember a few slides back, marketers are spending 10 hours a week just editing and revising. So here we see 3/4 of marketers are using Gen AI to streamline those processes. And that thoughtful editing is really essential to effective workplace communication. And you know, with the help of Gen AI, there's a real opportunity to democratize the effectiveness of these reviews across marketing, but really across the whole company. And those greedy little text boxes that I talked about, you know, communicating well across all the dimensions of the workplace, that's a tremendous mental load. But contextually aware Gen AI can be an immediate partner right now to help augment every marketer's communication, specifically at the point that they're writing. So speaking of Gen AI assistants, of course, like we have to talk about Grammarly. So I want to give everyone an opportunity to learn about how Grammarly is already helping marketing teams use the Gen AI to communicate better and more efficiently. So we'd love to set up a custom demo for you and your team. If you're interested, you'll see a poll pop up on your screen, and our team will be in touch with you to set something up. What our product experts share is what we've been talking about here. How do you bring that contextual aware guidance wherever your team's writing? How do you speed up that content creation and the revision cycle? And how do you take these incremental steps towards AI maturity with the tool that marketers have already been using for years? So, as you're filling out the poll, here's a quick recap of what we covered today. Communication is a strategic imperative. It's something that we're spending a ton of time on, but we don't really have a great way to measure it, and it is a real strategic driver. We need to optimize our communication stack. We already know that the tech is fragmented. We can't let the communication be fragmented as well. And in order to really, you know, feel empowered and take action, we all have to think big, but remember to act incrementally. Um, don't worry about the fear of messing up. You know, have a long-term vision for how you want to implement Gen AI, but take some small steps to make real impact today. Olivia, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. And
Thank you, Lena. It was a pleasure.
thanks, Livy. And to all of you who attended, thanks for joining us. We'll follow up with all of you who answered our poll and wanted to get in touch with a product expert. And we'll send out a recording of the webinar, so please keep an eye out for that as well. See you all next time.